I had a keynote on Monday and talked a lot about how design had such an important role in the creation of products and the creation of financial success. And one of the things that I came away with was this repeated question. And so I thought I'd pivot my talk a little bit today to address some of these stories because I think they're incredibly important for people. But, everybody asked me, what was Steve like? What was it like to work with him? And we met with him every Tuesday, and some days were great, some days were less great. But it was important to, as a way of learning about creating great product, it was important to take away from those interactions the lessons that he had to offer. So what I thought I'd start with the first one, the first short story, is people ask me all the time, how were you hired? And we had an interesting experience in doing that. We had done work with a winemaker in California called Robert Mondavi. And one of the things that Robert Mondavi did whenever he interviewed someone, the first thing he'd do is he would push you. And he would make whatever you were saying, if you're presenting it, he would say, yeah, that's okay. Tell me, I don't really like it. Tell me something else. Give me another idea. And I think for all you founders, you're going to find this, particularly with some of the VCs who are pretty tough. You're going to find that they come and they'll push you to start with. And so we had that experience with Mondavi, and one day we got a call. I had written the white paper on Apple Retail. I had given it to Steve, and we got a call from his assistant, Andrea, and Andrea said, hey, Steve wants to see a retail capabilities pitch. He's in the car, he'll be there in 15 minutes. And so we had 15 minutes to prepare for our presentation to him. But he showed up and he went through our work, and we had only done 2 other retail projects, one for Nike, one for the North Face before that. But anyway, with him coming into the room and talking about it, he said, okay, let's do this retail thing that you're talking about. And well, actually, before he said that, I want to talk about doing this retail thing. And so he looked through our work, and the first thing that he said was, what would you say if I told you I don't like any of this? And of course, my business partner was a bit shocked that that Steve would say this. He said, none of this looks like Apple. Why should I hire you? And I thought about it for a moment, and I said, well, because none of this looks like Apple. And the idea was that we weren't designing it for someone else, which is what all those other projects were. We were just designing the work for him. And so he shook hands, walked out the door, and he said, I don't know if you've done enough retail yet. And the next week we were called and hired and started with a whiteboard and started working on Apple Retail. So the moral to that story is the real tough clients, the ones that we ended up having the longest relationship with, are the ones who tend to push you at the beginning. And these are the ones that we think will help define human progress. These are the clients who actually know that they want to make something that has impact and that has change. And so that was very much in alignment with the way we thought and the way we worked. And one of the things that people always ask us about Steve was, everybody says he's really difficult to deal with. And if you ask a lot of people, they would complain. And I think it was unusual, but the idea of somebody who was really good with right brain skill set or somebody who was really good with the left brain skill set, those typically weren't the same people. And so if somebody would come in and say, hey, Steve, we got this great idea, the logic looks like this, you run down the logic tree, and he would figure it out whether it was going to work or whether it was going to be a bust. He would figure it out very quickly, but go down the logic tree. He would then turn and say, okay, let me look at it and talk and think about how it feels. And he would move between thinking about the logic and thinking about the intuition. And the interesting part of doing the work with him was that this intuition was the thing that he 99% of the time ended up going with once he could check the box on the logic tree. So again, working with incredibly talented people can be very difficult, particularly ones who have a fundamental strength in both right and left brain skills, but it's kind of taking those skills to make what you're doing successful and ultimately meaningful. So we believe this is about, creating value, and I talked a little bit about creating value in the Monday presentation, but it's the fundamental thing that we all value our business on. We've had a lot of discussions here about finance and things today, but ultimately we believe that it's the experience that you have with that product that you're creating, in the sense of making things that matter and delivering things that, to people in ways that matter, is the most important part. And so this return on experience idea is something that we find fundamentally at the root of all successful businesses. And we talked about the value creation engine previously. The key thing about this that I think is important, and for those who weren't in the Monday session, the idea of human outcomes, designing for human outcomes as the core purpose. We're trained to look at things from a tactical standpoint. When we finished the first Apple Store, people would say, hey, design an Apple Store for us. Just make a white store and put some tables and things in there, and we'll have a successful retail program. But nobody really looked at those outcomes. And this is something that Steve brought to the table every time. That what he was looking at in terms of the creation of the product, what he was looking at in terms of the creation of the value for that company started with human outcomes, then formed a strategy to deliver those outcomes, and ultimately then the tactics to achieve that strategy. And in doing that in that order made a huge difference. And what we found over the years was that this would be a consistent methodology, but it would also de-risk things. So when you get to the tactics part, because you're serving on delivering a human outcomes, you're actually de-risking your product. You're taking away the chances of failure or missteps. But in addition to taking away the risk, you also need to have the courage to move forward with it. The idea of designing human experience, design being not something that is what it looks like, but it's something that describes how it works, was a fundamental lesson coming from Steve and the interactions that we had throughout the entire retail program. The idea that we're working to serve people and not to serve the business first was the way you made the business successful. And ultimately, the experience being the primary driver, that would influence behavior, the way people would interact with your product and your business. So having those three parts are also critical to creating this holistic experience. This is something that's worth considering. Usually when I put this slide up in a boardroom, first thing the CEOs do is fold their arms and sort of look defensive. But the idea is the fact that they spend a lot of time and money creating something that they believe is different. The reality is the customers never see that. So if you're making something different, let people know what you're making, that's what it is about it that is different. And I think that differentiation is one way to separate yourself from your competitors. It's also interesting, we found that the easiest way to make someone else the leader in your industry is for you to voluntarily become the follower. And so we think that this is one thing, we see it in lots of business sectors, not just electronics, not just Apple. But the more you emulate your competitors, the more you're creating parity. The more parity you create, the more you become a commodity. And therefore the value of what you have drops to a lower level. We think if you focus on those human outcomes, you do it in a way that communicates the values that you have to the people who you want to connect with, but you do it really across four primary touch points: the environments, the human-to-human interactions, the services, products that you produce, and the communications that you have. And so in doing that, differentiation becomes kind of a key thing. And I think it was Bloomberg at the time wrote an article about what a failure the Apple retail program would be when it launched. And going back to that courage point, the night before we opened the first store, we were all finishing setting up the store, and Steve went around and went over and sat on one of the tables, and he called us all together and he said, guys, what if nobody comes tomorrow? And it was really interesting because at that point we were a bit panicked to hear him ask us that question. But the idea was really coming from the fact that even though all the things that we thought was going to work would work, he wasn't sure. And so taking that little bit of risk and having the courage to put that out there was a fundamental piece of launching the retail program. This is the Bloomberg quote. But one of the things that you can take away from that is that you're always creating noise if you're disrupting an industry. If you're not disrupting the industry, if you're not making some noise, you're probably not having a huge impact. Let's see, I'll just jump through this really quickly. My lights are flashing here. And then ultimately, obviously, when we started, Apple was I think they were saying it was 6 months from running out of cash, but they're certainly in a good cash position today. I guess the other piece of this is the idea of word of mouth, and that word of mouth comes from direct experience. This is something that we've seen, but that direct experience is generated through this conversation, through this dialogue of the number of receptors, the number of touch points that people have out in the world, and the intelligence that they derive from those touch points. And ultimately, we've seen it across many companies. We've seen it in every sector of business. And I'll move through this. This is just saying that how you do it creates value. The column on the far right, people are 6 times more likely to buy if they have a positive emotional experience, 12 times more likely to recommend the company, and 5 times more likely to forgive a mistake if you make one. So keep in mind that the experience that they're creating and that they're having with your products will have an incredible impact in terms of their consumption and participation. These 8 experience elements are elements that we refer to and we use on a regular basis, but focusing on people, aligning with their values, simplifying it, enabling it through technology, distinguishing it and evolving it, ultimately building trust that leads to positive relationships. These are really key structures for this approach. And so the last story I'll talk about relates to this film. So I played the film on Monday and people really liked it, so I thought I'd play it again. But this is Lee Clow. Lee Clow wrote most of the advertising that Apple did over the years that Steve was alive. And this particular film he created as a way of telling his entire advertising agency how to work, what they did, and why it mattered in their business. And so I'll play this for you.
Don't do the right thing. God knows you'll be tempted. The right thing sounds so good in meetings. It looks fantastic in charts. The right thing soothes racing pulses and settles churning stomachs. Everybody can get on board with the right thing. The right thing is good enough. But good enough is not enough. Don't do it. Don't do the right thing. Avoid it like the plague. So what are you supposed to do? The wrong thing? Of course not. Do the brave thing. The thing that troubles your sleep. The thing with a million unknowns. That seems ridiculous one moment and genius the next. That's the thing you should do. Chase it down. Don't let it go. Do the thing that disrupts, that upends, that doesn't just defy the status quo, but reshapes it forever. You can do that. You have that in you. To do the right thing or not is a choice. To disrupt or not is a choice. Let's do the brave thing.
And so the idea with this was the closing line was, let's all remember as we go to lunch to think about what we're doing and ensure that we're doing the brave thing.